Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's xLights Gems presentation. This week is on all things DMX, how to set them up, how xLights works with DMX, and all kinds of cool DMX things with Kyle Bostic from BFLight shows. With that, I will turn it over to you, Kyle. Have at it.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all having a good night. So this class is about all things DMX and mastering the control for special effects. So a little bit about me. My name's Kyle Bostic. I have about a little over 6 years in the industry, and I have experience with fog, fobble, snow machines, cold spark, fireworks, fire, moving heads, and wireless tech like wireless bracelets and things like that. Um, I own three holiday lighting companies and do this full time. So I own BF Light Shows, RGB Sequences, and then a drive-through in Michigan called My Bright Lights. And all right, so a little introduction kind of about this class is I'm going to go over making the DMX connection from a DMX fixture to a controller that we use in xLights, like a Genius or Falcon, Culp, Wally's, any one of those controllers. And then the cables are available. You can get the adapters on Amazon, but I had really bad luck with them. So we actually had some manufactured. So they go from DMX right to RJ45 and they can plug directly into our controllers. I'm also going to go into how to create the model in xLights, how to sequence them, and then some demo videos. So first up, we'll go over controller connections on the Falcon line of controllers and the XLights Genius line. Both of those brands use a DMX to RJ45 adapter or cable. So on the Falcon controllers, this picture specifically is the F16 V3, I'm sorry, yeah, V5, F16 V5. And this bottom port over here is labeled DMX. So that is your only DMX port on that. And then the two ports above it are for smart receivers. On the older Falcons, the DMX port is usually at the top. So just pay attention to the little label. It is printed somewhere on the board. For the XLights line of controllers, they have two DMX ports typically, and they are labeled DMX1 and DMX2. They are going to act essentially the same. You are going to connect a RJ45 style connector, plug that into your DMX port, and then the other end is a DMX 3-pin XLR connector. The controller connection for the Culp and Wally's line of controllers, they typically use a DMX to a 3-wire connector. So similar to this right here, you'll have a DMX1. There's also a DMX2 on this board. This is one of the Wally's lights or boards. So you'll have your bare wire, that is your ground. And then you have a DMX positive and a DMX negative signal line. And then those are going to go in the corresponding terminals here. You may have to do a pinout to actually figure out which one is negative. So these particular cables that we carry, white is positive, red is negative. And I know that would seem backwards. So you can do a continuity test at the head over here and actually test out and ohm out which one is which. All right. Once you have your connection to the actual fixture, one thing that is important that I don't have a slide for is setting your DMX address. I'll get into that a little bit more later in the presentation, but the DMX address is essentially what is going to allow you to send the channel information to the controller, and that is going to go to the correct DMX fixture. If you set your DMX address incorrectly, then even though you may program it correctly, the information won't get translated correctly and it won't actually function. All right, so I'm going to go over programming the different DMX devices here. So we have fog machines, bobbles, snow, fire, and moving heads. I'm going to kind of break this class into two sections. So I'll go over your fog, fobble, snow, those types of machines first, and then I'll have a second kind of half for just specifically moving heads. All right. So one thing to keep in mind with DMX devices are most of them are some type of motorized unit, whether or not you're triggering a motor or for a moving head to turn, you'll have your pan and your tilt where they have a physical motor that needs to move. Or if you are trying to get a snow machine or a fog machine working, they need time for that blower to warm up and the fans to kick on to start producing the snow or the fog. So keep that in mind that they need time to react. So just because you start the programming at, say, 1 second, doesn't mean they're going to kick off at that 1 second. Usually there is a bit of a lag time that you need to account for. Each DMX device is going to be a little bit different in how much of a lag time that is, but you'll need to just kind of play with it and kind of test out where it needs to be. For example, if you have the Fobble F4 from Froggy's Fog, there's a couple second delay before that kicks on. So if you're trying to time fog to a beat or something like that, you need to make sure you give yourself a couple of seconds before your actual beat is going to hit to kick the fog on. And then I'm going to go over how I set up some of these DMX models. And this is going to be in xLights. So fire machine, I do not recommend this model, but the spray the fire machines that you see on eBay and um, the cheap machines that you see that just use the starter fluid, those are super dangerous. I have a fun demo video later where I actually catch one on fire. But those use two channels and they both have to basically be set to on 255 for both channels in order for those to trigger. And then Cold Spark, I have used the Global Special Effects brand, and those ones are just a single channel. And the higher the value, 0 to 255, the higher the shot of Cold Spark material. So if you did a value of around 50, you'd have maybe a foot of actual Cold Spark coming up. If you did 255, they shoot up like 15 feet or something. And then the upshot fogs that we use are also from Global Special Effects, and those ones use 8 channels. And then we have the Froggy's Fog F3 Fobble machine. That one uses 3 channels. And then the Froggy's Fog F4 Fobble machine. That one has 2 different modes. We prefer to use them in the 15 channel mode, but there is another mode available that has a few less channels and gives you a few little less control. And then the snow machine, I use Froggy's Fog. I use the Boris C6, I believe, and that one uses 2 channels. And then for moving heads, really there's quite a variance depending on which brand or which model you get. Most of the ones in this hobby are between 14 and 20 channels. And the ones that are really important or useful in this hobby are your pan, tilt, shutter, dimmer, color, focus, and then your lamp. So those ones are probably going to be used most often. You can play with gobos and prisms and stuff as well, but xLights doesn't have a way to render those or show those in an xLights preview. So those ones aren't used as often by sequencers. And then this is just kind of a shot of the Froggy's Fog F3 Fobble machine. And this just kind of shows you how you would program them. So DMX channel 1 is fog volume. And you see over here under address information, 0 through 9 is off. It has no function at all. And then 10 through 255 gives you a value of 0 through 100% fog. And it gives you a little warning here, not available in bubble mode. So now if you come down to DMX channel 2, you have your bubble wand speed. Again, 0 through 9, it doesn't do anything. 10 through 255 is also 0 through 100. And then that is not available in the fog or haze mode. And then you come down to the machine function here. 0 through 9 does nothing. 10 through 60 is going to activate your fog mode. 61 through 120 is going to activate your haze mode. And then 121 through 180 is going to activate a bubble mode. 181 through 255 will activate your fobble mode. And what, in case any of you aren't familiar with fobbles, what fobbles are basically little bubbles that are filled with fog. So as the bubbles are being formed, fog is being pushed through the bubble while it forms. So that way the bubble is full of fog, and when kids run up and pop it, it pops and there's a little puff of smoke. And kids go absolutely wild over those. So
And Kyle, those
yep,
numbers, when you say it's 10 to 60 to activate, it doesn't
yep.
matter which number in that range will activate. Any number, those aren't levels of 0 to 100. Those are just on or off.
So 0 through 9, it does nothing. 10 would basically be a 1% of your
It is a
fog or
level.
bubble
Okay,
speed.
it's not
It
an on
is.
or off. It is a
Yep.
level.
Yep.
Okay.
And then so once you get to 60, that would be 100% fog.
But on some devices, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
The range is just anywhere in that range.
Yep. So you need to look at the manual. That's why I have a couple different manuals pulled up here so you can see the comparison of what different machines show. So this kind of gives you a good idea of exactly what you would be looking at in your own manual. So in this one, we have the Froggy's Fog Fobble F4. I'm going to speed through this one a little bit faster, but so 0 through 9, no function on basically all of these outputs. Oops. Um, and then you have channel 1 is fog, channel 2 bubble wand, channel 3 bubble fan, booster fan, and then you have a red, green, and blue LED. These also have your amber, white, and ultraviolet lights. You could add a strobing effect, your master dimmer, a macro. And what the macro does is it basically allows you to come in here and you could set a value, say like, so this is a good example to what you were just asking, 160 through 169. If you pick 161, 165, 168, it is always going to be 50% fog, 50% medium bubbles, anywhere in this particular range. But if you pick something in this range where it's, no function 0 to 9, doesn't matter if it's 0, 5, 9. But if you pick something between 10 and 255, say like 200, that's going to be closer to the 100% as opposed to the 0. So you just kind of have to read what it's telling you in here. All right. And then to set these up in xLights, if you want your LEDs to function as a pixel, so you want to be able to take a pixel and put it in an all group, a yard group, a floodlight group, anything like that, where you could just pick a color and turn it on, as opposed to trying to figure out the DMX value for green, blue, and red mixed together to give you a red, a green, a blue, a yellow, a cyan, a pink. Then the way I put these in xLights is I will break the model apart and I will do the first couple channels. So this Froggy's F4, 1 through 4. If we go back here, that gives me my fog output, my bubble wand, my bubble fan, and my booster. So channel 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then channels 5, 6, and 7. Those are my red, green, and blue, so my RGB values. That becomes a pixel. Notice the icon's different, and I don't use the DMX fixture. It's just a string of lights, and I just set that to one single pixel. And then I have additional channels here. So I have 8 through 15. 8 through 15 is my amber LED, my white LED, ultraviolet, LED strobe, dimmer, and then the operating macro. And then to make things a little easier, I always label the model, which ones are lights and which ones are not. So if it doesn't say lights, then I know I need to use DMX. If it's lights, I know I don't have to use DMX. I can just throw color on there. And then in xLights, under layout, you can click on your model. And then if you scroll down in your options over here, you'll have a strand or node name, and you can click the three dots to edit. And once you do that, you can edit the individual node names. So channel 1 is smoke, channel 2 is fan, channel 3 is wand, channel 4 is dimmer. And then that way you don't have to always reference the manual. You can just kind of do a quick reference right in here. So that'll save you a little bit of time and speed you up when you're trying to program these. And then I have a quick little video demo of how these are actually working. And it also shows why I don't recommend using these fire machines. And you'll notice that as time goes on, this fire machine is still on fire. And then it actually burst into flames. And eventually I was able to put that out before it actually exploded. But if I would have let that go, would have exploded. So those are the reasons I don't recommend using those fire machines. I have used several of them and have had lots of problems where the O-ring will end up failing on it. It causes a leak and the fire will basically, the igniter will catch on fire and then it will basically track down to the starter fluid can that is leaking where the O-ring fails. And then they catch on fire. And if you don't put them out, they will explode. All right, so we'll jump over to a quick xLights demo. While I'm doing that, I see there's a few questions in chat, but I can't pull it up right now. You
No,
guys
no
want to come up?
questions, just
Oh,
comments.
okay. All right, so you should be able to see my xLights screen here. This is my house from our Halloween show in 2023, and we had fire machines programmed in this one. So I'll go ahead and scroll down here and take a look at how those are programmed. So in here, you can see I have DMX fire left, center, and right. And then I have very short little bursts in here. And then if you kind of open that up, you can see channel 1 and channel 2 are both set to 255. And then these moving head fixtures you see here are actually what are representing the fire machines. And then this one is a fog machine. So I have a couple different things kind of going off at the same time. So we don't run into any copyrights. I'll go ahead and mute that. But as the music would be playing, then the beat drops, then you see that the machines are kind of kicking on, and I have these kind of waving around, but those are fog machines, and then the other ones that are stationary are the fire machines. And each machine functions a little bit differently. So go ahead and scroll up here. So right in here, I have the DMX for a fog machine. This one's from Amazon. It's very similar to the Froggy's F4, just a little bit cheaper. Doesn't output quite as much, but so I have this as a 8.13 second duration. And if you scroll down, I have the master LED dimmer set to 255. That has to be set in order for you to see any of the LEDs on. And then fog control, this one's set at 16. So this one is just fog. And you know that if you refer back to that manual under those macro settings. Then if you come over here, this one is 39, so it's a different fog control. This one's also 39. And then you can just kind of scroll through here and you can see as the song changes, this macro control changes, which is going to make the machine do different things. For the lights, you can see I'm just using, in this case, a color wash, and I can grab these effects from a group of floodlights, or I can throw them in a group and they're going to perfectly match what the house is doing. And I don't have to manually try to figure out what value green I'm using in here. As you can see, it's not your standard just 255 green. It's kind of like a yellowish green. So trying to match those is really difficult, and this saves you a ton of time. In the layout, when you're going to actually set them to your show, I don't remember exactly which one these are under. So the way you would add them over to your serial ports is you are going to grab your first one, and it's going to have, I label them so DMX 1 right here, and then channels 2 through 4, channels 5 through 8. So I know 1, 2 through 4, 5 through 8, and it gets daisy chained like so. And then this is what I was talking about with your DMX address. So right here, it shows you channel 1. And then in this little square bracket here, that is DMX address 1. This is then DMX address 2 and DMX address 5. This is on a different DMX port, and this one has a DMX address of 1, 3, and 5. So these don't have to start at 1. You could start this essentially at any number you want within 255, but you need to account for how many channels your fixture is going to use, and then if you are daisy chain anything. So you, in this case, since it's 2 channels, you couldn't use 255 because you need at least 2 channels to trigger the machine. But you could make it 250. This one could be 253 and then 255. Well, 256. So this one would also be over 249 to 256. And then you just upload that to your output to your controller. One thing that you do want to be aware of is your serial ports need to be set at 100%. If you have your if you use FPP and you have that brightness controller plugin and you change that value, it will update the DMX values and then they won't work. So keep that in mind if you use the FPP brightness plugin. All right, so we're about halfway through. Does anybody have any questions on the fog machine side of things? Fog machine, snow machine, any of that kind of stuff?
You can go ahead and unmute yourselves and just ask and shout out a question if you have a question about it. Yeah, looks good, Kyle.
Okay.
I do have one generic question, Kyle.
Sure.
So I don't have any DMX yet. I'm looking at ordering four moving heads. I'm tossed up between who I'm going to get them from, but that's a different story. To play with xLights and the configuration without a controller, without a device, how would you recommend doing that? A null controller, just setting it up on one of my actual controllers, but nothing there?
Um, it really, I don't think it matters too much if you use your actual controller or if you just throw like a generic controller in there. I mean, you could, whatever brand you typically use, if you use Falcon or Culp or Genius, I would set up whatever controller you plan to use. And if you don't want to adjust your current show settings, just add a new fake controller into your xLights layout. Um, let's go back here. So you could come over here, add Ethernet, just for argument's sake. Genius 16, give it a quick IP address, and this doesn't even matter. So now I have a controller. Oops. So now I have a controller set up, and I could drag and drop moving heads onto here. Even though I don't own this controller and have no plans to add this controller, I could do that. So at least I can assign the channels and play with it in xLights and get an accurate rendering. And then when
Gotcha.
you're done, you could just delete it, and that way it won't actually affect your show.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Um, Ron says you don't need a controller. If you use the group method that a lot of sequencers use, myself included, like these ones right here, they do use the start channel. So I highly recommend having them assigned to a controller. Otherwise, if those channels don't work correctly, you won't be able to set
There,
the corresponding
there
overlap.
there will always be channels assigned, even if it's not on a controller, it'll be just on unused channels, but regardless, but yeah,
I so I
you're
did
good.
that the the first year I was doing this. I didn't have them assigned, and a lot of people ran into issues when they bought the sequence. They'd open it, and those channel values changed when they imported the sequence. So I changed that, and now they are actually assigned. So okay. Um, somebody asked, or it looks like someone was saying that the Starlights are fast or slow. I've used most of the main models in this hobby. I've used the Matis Designs Phoenix Ray Max, the standard outdoor 350 watt one, the indoor ones from your Pixel Store or Magical Light shows. Um, those ones are the indoor ones are the fastest, I would say, followed by the Phoenix Ray Max, followed by the Starlight Minis, followed by the Phoenix Ray LED version, and then followed by the uh, outdoor 350 watt version. So hopefully that.
What are your thoughts on Raywoo's waterproof?
I haven't used Raywoo's waterproof ones. The generic 350 watt one that is popular, it's very, very heavy. So I have a hard time recommending it because it's so big and bulky. It gives it,
76 pounds.
yeah, it gives a decent beam, but they are super heavy, super bulky, and they're very slow. So if you're trying to do, harder rock style songs or fast movements with them, don't recommend them at all. And if you're on a high pitched roof and you're carrying them up a ladder, I would get a different model.
Okay. Yeah, I'm leaning towards the Starlights.
Yeah, the Starlights are awesome. I like the Starlights and the Phoenix Ray Max. Those are probably my two highest recommendations. I haven't played with Tom's new ones that he just announced a couple days ago, but um, the Starlights I've played with and the Phoenix Ray Max I've played with, and those are both great units. All right, so moving heads. Again, I currently use the indoor 230 watt ones from your Pixel store. They do require domes, so they are a little more expensive. I also have a couple of the 380 watt outdoor rated Phoenix Ray Max. Both of them work great. The indoor models are just a little bit faster, but the Phoenix Ray Max are, just a hair behind, but you don't need the dome, so they are significantly cheaper if you factor in needing the dome and the moving head. So definitely a selling point for the Phoenix Ray Max. And those also have the no-fly zone. They have some new added gobos that are pretty cool. So really, if you're looking for moving heads to add to your show, I would recommend either the Phoenix Ray Max or your Pixel Store Starlights. All right, so DMX models. I'm going to go over the new advanced model and the old method of doing it. So the important channels to create, or the important ones to create a group for, are the pan, tilt, shutter, dimmer, and color. You may be able to add a focus in there. The ones that are less often used are your prism, rotation, speed, frost, and gobo. And then to create your quote unquote groups for moving heads, essentially it is a string of lights. And then you are going to set the number of strings to the number of moving heads you have. And I'll go over doing that in just a moment. But you're going to go through, add your DMX moving head, set up the number of channels it has. You have the option to, well, you used to have the option to hide the body. Now, with the new moving head advanced option, this is no longer there. You have a pan channel, pan orientation, degrees of rotation. So you have all your different channels in here. This has changed slightly with the new model. I'll have to get an updated screenshot. But one very, very, very important part of that, when you set up your groups like that, you need to go into the string properties under string type and set single color. If you pick RGB by default, it will absolutely not work. So make sure you're coming in here and changing this string type to single color. All right, so the new DMX moving head model is going to give you a slightly different menu option here. So you have a fixture number. So you're going to assign it either fixture 1 or up to 8. And then again, you still define the number of channels. And then you now have a pan motor section. And most moving heads have a coarse and a fine channel. Prior to the new moving head advanced, it didn't take advantage of the fine. So I just had mine set at 0, but now it allows you to either use coarse or fine. So you just define those two here. And then you have a min and max limit degree, your range of motion, which is how much the device can actually rotate. Most moving heads are 540 degrees. Your orient to 0 is basically defining your home point. So if you set yours down to the right or straight forward or down to the left, that is basically what this is defining right here. And then your orient to forward is how many degrees does your moving head need to rotate in order to be facing over the crowd. And then your slew limit here in degrees per second is how fast can your moving head perform how many degrees per second. In our case, these ones can move 150 degrees per second. And then if you have a counterclockwise moving head or an outdoor model, those typically rotate counterclockwise, and you just check this little box. And then if you are mounting your moving heads upside down, like under the eave of a garage or underneath stage truss or something, and they're, inverted, you just check this little upside down box right here. And then we also have all the options for tilt in here. So you have your coarse and fine, same min max, your range of motion. These usually are between 200 and 270. And then again, your orient to zero is, how much does it rotate when you first power it up and it gets into its home position. And then your orient up is how many degrees it needs to rotate to point straight up and down. Then again, you have your slew limit, you have your reverse, and then if you mount them upside down. All right, now we'll go over to an xLights demo. So in here, I'll just kind of go over quickly how these different groups work. So in here, if you're using the old method of programming, you're going to take a string and drag it out. You'll set this to whatever you're trying to control. You'll set the number of strings to the actual number of moving heads you have. And then you'll change the nodes per string to 1. You'll come down here to string properties, click the drop down, change that to single color. And then after you've done that, you can go ahead and find your start channel. Click the drop down, use start channel. Click on individual start channels. Click on the 3 dots over here, and then you'll pick start of model. You'll scroll through your list of props and find your first moving head, and then you'll set the start channel to your corresponding channel. In my case, the dimmer is 3. We'll say OK. And then you're going to rinse and repeat that process for all of your moving heads. So this one, oops, 2. And then you basically just repeat that process all the way through. And then that allows you to have all of your channels here mapped directly to your moving head. So go ahead and delete that. And then I'm going to pull up our store layout and we'll do a quick demo. And then I set up a different view for just moving heads just to make things a little bit simpler. But we have our group up here. And if we are using the old method, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I'll do most of this on the new one. But you're going to grab your shutter, drag an on effect all the way across. And then you can also use the different effects in here, like single strand or bars. And this will let you control the different moving head actual lights. And then, like I said, you can kind of play with these. You could do, from middle, from left to right, and you are able to kind of play and come up with some different effects in here. So if we come in here, we do like a left, maybe 2 of those, 3 of those. So you can kind of come in here and just kind of play with them and you get lots of cool different effects in here. So depending on what you're trying to get your thing to actually do. And then for pan and for tilt, you're going to go ahead and you can, in my case, we program them on the node level. So you can come in here and you can drag out an effect. Basically what I did here is I double clicked on the MH pan, then double clicked on the strand, and that gives you all your nodes. Node 1 is essentially moving head 1. And value 128 is going to make it point over the crowd. So now as it's doing this, you can see they are pointing over the crowd. They're kind of doing their thing. If you want them to become a little more interactive and get some motion and things like that, we can also double click on tilt and strand 1. Now they're going to point straight up in the sky. And then we can also click on this little curve here, which is a value curve. And then you have lots of options here. So you could do sawtooth or ramp. Sawtooth is kind of fun. Basically what it'll do is allow the moving head to kind of go back and forth. So DMX value 43 equals 90 degrees for moving heads. So mine move clockwise. So 86, they would be pointing to the right. 128, they're pointing straight at you. 172, they're pointing to the left. So if I do something like this, they're going to swing all the way from right to left 2 times. And we'll go ahead and update that. And just so you can see them kind of rotating, we'll change that to like 60. So you can see they are rotating to the right, back to the left, back to the right, back to the left. So doing little things like that, like those value curves, are going to give you the control that you're looking for in order to move them, up and around. And then we'll go ahead and jump back over to the new moving head effect. And I still use the on value for the shutter and either on or shockwave or single strand bars, all that stuff on the actual dimmer themselves as opposed to in the moving head effect. But what the moving head effect will allow you to do is you can come in here and you can drag this out across your timeline, however long you want this to take. And in here in this moving head effect settings, you have some additional options in here. Basically, this is your home point. So this is going to point straight up and straight out. If you drop this down, it's going to point over the crowd. If you do it this way, it's going to point away from the crowd. And this is supposed to be the same no matter what moving head model or brand you have and how you set them up, because it's just corresponding with the channels. So even though I may set mine to point down to the left and you use down to the right, this graph is going to allow the xLights to do the math to recalculate what those values need to be. So Gil spent a lot of time working on this to try to improve mapping moving heads, and this tool is very helpful. So if you want to do similar effects like this, where they were scanning all the way from the right to the left, you'll go ahead and you can either select all, you can select individual moving heads, evens, odds, anything like that. And then again, you have the value curve option here. We could come and do sawtooth. And in this case, we're using degrees instead of the DMX values. So we would use something like 45 to 45. And now you can see they are rotating again from left to right. This effect is a little bit longer, so go ahead and make that just a little shorter. And then we could do the same thing with tilt and get them to kind of go up and down. Just so this can show up a little bit better, we'll just do an on effect across this whole thing. One thing to be aware of with the moving head effect, every time you click off of it, you click on something else, by default, it's going to unselect your moving heads. So if I come in here and I start making changes, it's not going to actually change anything because none of the moving heads are selected. So you'll come back in here, and basically every time you click off of it, you'll have to reselect the fixture. and then you can come back in and continue tweaking. Couple cool things that they added in this new moving head effect feature is the fan pan. And what this will do is it basically allows you to automatically create a fan where the moving head fixtures are going to basically point outwards. So if we make So you can see right now they have kind of this fan appearance. Now they're basically just pointing straight out. So very quickly you could come in here. We could again kind of do sawtooth, -10, 20. And without doing any math, very quickly we can have them all perfectly fanning out, fanning in, and kind of creating that crossover. So we got about 2 minutes before we normally open it up for questions. So we'll go over one other thing real quick. So if we come over to pathing, is another cool option that they added. You can create little presets like this one. And we'll go in here and I'm going to turn this fan off for this portion. Come back over to pathing and we can adjust the scale and we could adjust the time offset. And you can get some really cool movements where they're all basically spinning in a circle here just by clicking on this little preset. And then you could play with the scale. You can make it bigger. You could make it smaller. Depending on how big or how small you make this scale, you may hit the limit of where your moving head can physically rotate. So you can see at 1, it's jerky a little bit, kind of gets stuck right there. So right there, it keeps hitting something. That's the moving head hitting its limit on how much it can rotate. So you can come in and you can kind of play with the different tilt values until you eliminate that, because it's running into an issue where that motor can't complete that motion. But that's kind of how you would create more fluid motions and create some more dazzling effects without having to spend hours trying to figure out the different math to be able to do it. So thanks, Gil, for adding that. We got about 10 minutes or so left for questions.
Any questions? Oh, question. I know Sam had a bunch. No, is mute turned off? Good. Sam says he has 7-channel wash lights. He's trying to figure out how to put it in xLights and sequence it like a light strip.
So you could do that kind of a couple different ways. Are the 7 channels all light related, or is some of them like a dimmer kind of thing? What are the 7 channels?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
So channel 1 is brightness, channel 2 is red, channel 3 is green, channel 4 is blue, channel 5 is white, channel 6 is strobe, channel 7 is basically a manual color selection, and channel 8 looks like it's color selection shade. So maybe a combination of them.
probably like a
So
dimmer in and out, faster, higher, faster dims in and out.
could be. So what I would do is I would set that up kind of like the fog machine that I set up. So channel 1 would be one model. And then channels 2, 3, and 4, I would set up as a pixel. Channels 5, 6, 7, and 8, I would set up as another model. And then if you have multiple washes that you're trying to configure, you could create a group for all the different ones you have. And then you could throw on effects. You could throw that pixel set in a group with all house, yard, floodlights, whatever you want, in order to control them with a standard color, shader, anything like that you wouldn't normally be able to do with DMX. So it takes a little more effort to set up the model, and it's a little harder to like move them around inside xLights, but it is a lot easier to program the colors and keep them accurate with things like shaders or all house effects with like pinwheels and stuff like that.
Yeah, like I was wondering if I'd have to do something weird like that to get it to work right. Like I'm wondering if I'm better off just like time coding and using just one my ETC board and with time coding.
Possibly. It really kind of depends what you're trying to do with the wash, and if you want it to act, more as a floodlight standalone, or if you want it to act, if you have a shader on a whole house or something and you want it to visually change as the shader changes. I have the dark spots in the shader, the bright spots, or if you just want it to be purple when you have a purple shader on. That would kind of depict how I would do that.
And then like xLights, I can just connect like an RNet device, right?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, no other questions? All right, Kyle. Thanks again.
All
Great
right.
one.
You're welcome.
Saving that
Glad
one.
we didn't run over like last time.
No,
Tried to
no, all
make
good.
this one more efficient.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. If you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out, send me a message. Happy to answer any questions and help you out.
Thanks, Kyle.
You're
Yep,
welcome.
thanks again.